I never imagined that the person I trusted the most would betray me in the most unimaginable way. I was 32 when the truth came crashing down on me. My sister, the one I grew up with, sharing secrets and dreams, had committed the ultimate betrayal. It was a chilly autumn evening when I stumbled upon the truth. William, my then fiancé, had left his phone on the kitchen counter. A message popped up, glaring at me with harsh reality. It was from my sister. The message was clearly not meant for a brother-in-law. My heart sank as I read the words. I miss you. I can't wait for our little family to be complete. Confronting William was a blur of tears and disbelief. Why her? Why my sister? I remember asking, my voice trembling. William couldn't meet my highs. It just happened. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you, he muttered. His apology sounded hollow, a feeble attempt to mend a wound too deep. The pain was unbearable, but what came next was even worse. It was a confrontation I had dreaded but couldn't avoid. I went to my sister's house, my mind swirling with anger and hurt. The door opened, and there she stood, her eyes betraying a flicker of guilt. Is it true? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She sighed, looking down at her swollen belly. Yes, it's true. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice laced with remorse that did little to soothe my pain. Sorry? You destroy my life, and all you can say is sorry. I couldn't contain the bitterness in my voice. She reached out, but I recoiled. Please understand, it wasn't planned. I never meant to fall for William, she pleaded. But you did, and now you're carrying his child. Another one, I said, the reality sinking in. The conversation that followed was a blur of tears, excuses, and apologies, none of which could undo the betrayal. I left her house with a heavy heart, knowing that our relationship could never be the same again. I had lost not just my fiancé, but my sister too. In that moment, I made a decision. I would cut her out of my life completely. The weeks following the revelation were the hardest of my life. The betrayal left a gaping hole in my heart, one that seemed impossible to heal. I was engulfed by a mixture of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. It wasn't just about losing William, it was the profound betrayal by my sister that cut the deepest. I remember the day I decided to cut ties. It was a decision that felt both heartbreaking and necessary. My family had gathered at our parents' house, a place that once felt like a sanctuary of warmth and love, now tainted by the betrayal. My mother approached me cautiously, her eyes filled with worry. Honey, I know you're hurt, but she's still your sister. Maybe with time. I cut her off, the bitterness evident in my voice. No, Mom, there's no maybe here. She's not my sister anymore, not after what she's done. My father, usually a man of few words, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We understand your pain, but she's family. Family sticks together, he said softly. I shook my head, tears brimming in my eyes. Family doesn't do what she did. She made her choice, and now I'm making mine. I can't. I won't have her in my life anymore, I stated firmly. My parents exchanged a sorrowful glance, the weight of my words hanging heavily in the air. I stood up, feeling the need to assert my decision further. I expect everyone to respect my choice. I don't want to hear about her. I don't want to see her, and I certainly don't want her to be a part of my life in any way. My mother reached out, her voice trembling. But she's your sister, she interjected. I interrupted, a firm resolve in my tone. She was my sister. She's nothing to me now. The room fell silent, the finality of my words settling like dust. I walked out of that room knowing I had closed a significant chapter of my life. It was more painful for my family to witness this rift, but for me, it was a necessary step to move forward. As I drove away from the house that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I was leaving behind a part of my life, a part of who I was, but I knew deep down it was the only way to heal, to rebuild myself from the ashes of betrayal. 2 years had passed since the day I decided to sever ties with my sister. Life, as it tends to, moved on in its unpredictable rhythm, leading me to paths I never imagined I would tread. Among these was meeting James, the man who would eventually become my husband. James and I met at a mutual friend's party. I wasn't keen on attending, still nursing the wounds of my past, but something about that evening felt different. It was there, amidst laughter and casual chatter, that I saw James for the first time. He had a kind smile and eyes that seemed to understand the world in a way few did. We hit it off instantly, talking for hours. It was during one of our deep conversations that I decided to open up about my past. I had a pretty rough breakup, I started hesitantly. My ex-fiancé and my sister, they betrayed me in the worst way possible. James listened intently, his expression one of understanding rather than pity. I know something about betrayal myself, he shared. My brother, believe it or not, had a habit of getting involved with my exes. I guess some siblings just don't understand boundaries. There was comfort in finding someone who understood the pain and complexity of such betrayals. Our shared experiences drew us closer, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. Our relationship blossomed into something beautiful and solid. When James proposed, it was under a sky full of stars, at the very spot where we had met. "You've brought light into my life in ways you can't imagine," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Tears of joy rolled down my cheeks as I nodded, whispering, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Our wedding was a small, intimate affair, surrounded by those who truly mattered. As I walked down the aisle, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. The pain of the past was still there, but it was overshadowed by the hope of a new beginning. James and I soon started a family, welcoming 3 beautiful children into our lives. They were a constant source of joy and laughter, filling our home with love and warmth. In those moments, holding my children or looking into James's loving eyes, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of my world was now just a distant memory. It had led me to this new life, a life filled with love, trust, and happiness. I once thought I had lost everything forever. Life with James and our children was blissful, a stark contrast to the turmoil of my past. However, the world outside our little haven continued to spin, and with it came news of my sister and William that I couldn't avoid. One evening, as James and I were putting the kids to bed, he mentioned, "I heard something about William today. He had an accident at work. Quite serious, I believe." I paused, a complex mix of emotions bubbling inside me. "Oh, and how did you hear about this?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Mike from the office. You remember him, right? He's William's colleague," James explained. "And my sister?" The words left my lips before I could stop them. Part of me didn't want to know, but another part, the part that still remembered her as my sister, cared despite everything. "She's struggling, to say the least. With William's disability and her own health issues, things aren't looking great for them," James said gently, understanding the weight of his words. I sighed deeply, feeling conflicted. "Thank you for telling me, James." The news of their hardship stirred something in me. Despite the pain and betrayal, I couldn't completely erase the fact that she was once my sister, someone I loved and cared for. But the wound was still there, a reminder of the line she'd crossed. A few days later, my mother called. I could sense the hesitance in her voice. "Dear, I know you don't want to hear about her, but your sister is in a bad place right now. With William's condition, they're struggling to even feed the girls," Mom said softly. I felt a tug at my heart, thinking of the innocent children caught in the middle of this mess. "I need to think about this, Mom. I can't promise anything," I replied. After the call, I sat down with James, pouring out my conflicted thoughts. "They're innocent in all this, James, the kids, but helping them means opening a door I've closed a long time ago." James took my hand, offering a comforting squeeze. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember, you don't owe them anything. Your first responsibility is to yourself and to our family." His words were a balm, a reminder of the new life I had built, a life far removed from the shadows of my past. I lay awake that night, pondering over a decision that felt impossible to make. My heart ached for the children, but was it enough to risk the peace I had fought so hard to find? The dilemma of whether to help my sister and her family weighed heavily on me. James noticed my unrest and often asked if I was all right, but I found it hard to articulate the storm brewing within. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the phone rang. It was my father this time, his voice weary, a tone I wasn't accustomed to hearing from him. "Your sister and William are in a tight spot. They asked if we could take in the girls for a while," he said. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "And what did you say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're considering it, but they also asked if you and James might help," he replied. I was silent for a moment, digesting his words. "Dad, I don't think I can do that," I finally said. There was a pause on the other end. "I understand, but they are just kids. They shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes," he said gently. I know, Dad. I know, but it's not just about the kids. It's everything she did. Everything she took from me, I replied, my voice strained with emotion. We just thought, maybe for the sake of family, he began. Dad, some wounds are too deep. I'm sorry. I can't, I said, hanging up the phone, feeling a mix of frustration and guilt. James reached across the table, covering my hand with his. It's okay to say no. You've been through a lot, he said softly. I nodded, grateful for his support, but still tormented by the decision. A few days later, my sister reached out directly, a message appearing on my social media. Her words were desperate. I know what happened between us, but I need you. The girls need you. We're family, after all. I stared at the screen, her words echoing in my mind. Family. That word had lost its meaning when she betrayed me. I replied, my fingers typing with a resolve that surprised even me. What we had as family ended a long time ago. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. She responded quickly, a hint of bitterness in her words. How can you be so cold? They're just kids, and they have their parents and grandparents. I have my own family to think about. I wrote back, my heart racing with a cocktail of emotions. The exchange left me drained. It was one thing to say no to my parents, but quite another to deny my sister directly. Yet I knew in my heart it was the right decision. My loyalty was to the family I had built, the family that stood by me when my world fell apart. That night, as I tucked my children into bed, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the complexity of the adult world, I knew I had made the right choice. My duty was to protect them, to ensure their world remained unscathed by the shadows of my past. Despite my clear message on social media, my sister refused to take no for an answer. A few days later, she tried to contact me again, this time through a more direct approach. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard the familiar tone of an incoming video call. Hesitantly, I accepted the call, and there she was, my sister, her face worn with stress and worry. Please, I'm begging you. We're at our wits' end here. William can barely move, and I'm struggling to keep up with everything, she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I told you already, I can't help you. I'm sorry. But we're sisters, she insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. Remember how we used to dream of our future together? How we promised to always be there for each other? That was a long time ago, before you made your choice, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She was silent for a moment, then said, It's not just about us anymore. It's about the girls. Don't they deserve a chance? I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memories of betrayal. They do deserve a chance, but not at the cost of my family's peace. You have other people who can help. She sobbed openly now, her face a portrait of anguish. I never meant to hurt you like this. I was just lost. We all make choices, and we have to live with the consequences, I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. The call ended with her in tears and me in a state of emotional exhaustion. I turned off my phone, not wanting any more intrusions into the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. James found me sitting at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. Are you okay? He asked, concern etched on his face. I looked up at him, grateful for his presence. It was my sister. She's trying to guilt me into helping them. He sat down beside me, taking my hands in his. You don't owe her anything. You've suffered enough because of her actions. It's okay to think of yourself. I nodded, drawing strength from his words. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that my sister's pleas had only strengthened my resolve. I had moved on, and I couldn't let the ghosts of my past disrupt the life I had so carefully built. The decision to stay away from her was not just a choice, but a necessity for my own well-being and for the sake of my family. My decision not to help my sister and her family was met with mixed reactions from my relatives. Some understood my stance, but others, particularly my extended family, viewed it as heartless. The subject came up during a family gathering at my parents' house, a setting that once felt like a refuge, but now seemed more like a battleground. As we sat around the dinner table, my aunt, always one to speak her mind, broached the topic. I can't believe you're turning your back on your own niece and nephew. They're just children, she said. I felt all eyes on me, the weight of their judgment heavy in the air. It's not a decision I made lightly, I started, trying to keep my voice calm. But there's a lot of history there that can't be ignored. But they are innocent in all of this, my uncle chimed in. Shouldn't they be spared from the sins of their parents? I understand that, and I sympathize with them. But being involved with my sister again, even indirectly, is something I can't handle. It's a boundary I've set for my own well-being, I explained. My mother, always the peacemaker, tried to soften the atmosphere. Let's not forget what she went through. This isn't an easy situation for anyone. The conversation shifted, but the tension lingered. Later, in the kitchen, my cousin approached me. I get that you're hurt, but don't you think this grudge has gone on long enough? She's family, after all. I leaned against the counter, feeling a familiar frustration rise within me. It's not just a grudge. What she did changed everything. I've moved on, and I can't go back to that dark place again. My cousin shrugged, a clear sign of disagreement, and walked away. As James and I drove home that night, the silence in the car was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the family dinner. He finally broke the silence. Your family means well, but they don't fully understand what you went through, and that's okay. You don't have to justify your feelings to anyone. His words were a balm, soothing the sting of the evening's events. I realized then that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about who stands by you, understands your pain, and respects your decisions. James was my family, and with him, I had found a haven of understanding and acceptance. The backlash from my relatives was just noise compared to the symphony of support I had in him. The aftermath of the family gathering left me in a contemplative mood. I found solace in the nursery, watching my children sleep peacefully, unaware of the complexities of adult relationships. James joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulder. You've been quiet since we got back, he observed softly. I sighed, leaning into his embrace. It's just, everyone thinks I'm being unreasonable, but they don't understand how deep the hurt goes. They might never fully understand, and that's okay. You have every right to protect yourself and our family, he reassured me. His words reminded me of the safe haven we had built together, yet the family's words echoed in my mind, stirring a whirlpool of doubt and guilt. A few days later, I found myself at my parents' house, helping my mom with some chores. She seized a quiet moment to speak her mind. You know, your sister called me crying the other day, she said, her voice tinged with concern. I paused, the dishcloth in my hand momentarily still. Mama, she's really struggling, and those kids. My mom's voice trailed off, laden with unspoken pleas. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I know it's hard, Mom, but I have to think about my mental health too. Being around her, even indirectly, would bring back a lot of pain. My mom reached out, touching my hand gently. I understand, dear. I just wish things were different. So do I, Mom. So do I whispered, feeling a familiar ache in my heart. That conversation with my mom stayed with me for days. It wasn't just about making a choice, it was about standing by it, even when it was questioned by those closest to me. One evening, while putting the kids to bed, my eldest asked, Mommy, why don't we ever see Auntie? Her question caught me off guard. Well, honey, sometimes people have disagreements, and it's better for them to stay apart. Like when I don't want to play with Tommy because he took my toy, she asked. Something like that, I replied, packing her in. Lying in bed later that night, I thought about my daughter's innocent question. My decision not only affected me, but also shaped the perception of my children. It was a sobering thought, but I knew I had to stand my ground for the sake of my own well-being and for the healthy environment I wanted for my children. They deserved a mother who was whole, not fragmented by the ghosts of her past. As days turned into weeks, the initial storm of family opinions gradually settled into a quiet but persistent hum in the background of our lives. Despite the support from James and the joy our children brought, there were moments when doubt crept in, whispering what-ifs and could-have-beens. One such evening, while the kids were at a sleepover and James and I were enjoying a quiet dinner, he broached the subject that had been lingering in the air. You've been distant lately. Is it about your sister again? He asked, his eyes reflecting a mix of concern and understanding. I put down my fork, the truth spilling out. Part of me wonders if I'm being too harsh. But then I remember the pain, the betrayal, and I just can't bring myself to face her, not even for the sake of her kids. James reached across the table, taking my hand. It's okay to have these feelings. You're human. But don't forget, you make this decision for valid reasons. Your peace of mind is important too. I nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. I know, It's just hard when your own family questions your choices. We can't control what others think or feel, but we can control how we react and how we let it affect us and our family," he said gently. His words were a reminder of the strength I had found in myself and in our life together. The path I had chosen was not an easy one, but it prioritized my healing and the well-being of the family James and I had built. A few days later, during a phone call with my dad, he hesitantly mentioned my sister again. "I just thought you should know. Your sister's been asking about you. She's worried, despite everything," he said softly. I felt a twinge in my heart, but my resolve remained strong. "Tell her I'm fine, Dad, but that's all. Please, I don't want any more messages or updates." After hanging up the phone, I realized that while the past would always be a part of me, it did not define me. My choices, difficult as they were, had led me to a place of growth and newfound strength. I had learned to prioritize my own well-being and that of my immediate family. Though the future was uncertain and the path to forgiveness unclear, I found comfort in the love and stability that surrounded me now. Months had passed since I last heard from my sister. Life with James and our children continued to be a source of joy and stability. Yet the echoes of the past still resonated, a reminder of the journey I had been on. One sunny afternoon, while watching the kids play in the backyard, James joined me with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one and smiled. "You seem more at peace these days," he remarked. I took a sip, feeling the warmth of the coffee and his presence. "I am. It's been a journey, but I think I'm finally learning to let go of the past." "That's good to hear. You know, no matter what, I'm proud of how you've handled everything," he said, his eyes full of admiration. I leaned against him, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thanks, James. I couldn't have done it without you." As we sat in comfortable silence, I reflected on the changes within me. The bitterness and pain had faded, replaced by a sense of acceptance and inner peace. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing not to let it control my present and future. Later that week, while sorting through some old boxes, I came across a photo of my sister and me in our younger days. For the first time in a long while, I looked at it without the sting of betrayal. Instead, there was a recognition of the bond we once shared and an acknowledgement of the separate paths we had taken. That evening, as James and I put the kids to bed, our youngest asked, "Mommy, do you have a sister?" I paused, tucking her in. "Yes, honey, I do. But sometimes, even with family, people grow apart." "Will you ever see her again?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. I kissed her forehead, a bittersweet smile on my lips. "Maybe one day, sweetie. But for now, we have our own happy little family, and that's what matters." As I turned off the lights, I realized how far I had come. The journey through pain and betrayal had led me to a place of strength and resilience. My family, James, and our children were my anchor, my source of unconditional love and support. Lying in bed that night, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life involving my sister would always be a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I had moved forward, not just moved on, and in doing so, I had found a deeper understanding of myself and what truly mattered in life. My heart was at peace, knowing that the future held promise and hope, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next with my love.